So again, just a brief recap. General economic efficiency is this idea that really has these two components: allocative efficiency, which we've already defined. So if you don't remember it, then go back and look at the other lecture. And productive efficiency, which we've also defined. And so for an economic outcome to be efficient, it has to have allocative efficiency and productive efficiency. And so remember, the reason we're going through this is we want to be able to demonstrate the first fundamental welfare theorem. And the first fundamental welfare theorem saying, basically, I'm going to give the short version, that competitive markets are efficient. And we want to be able to demonstrate this using our simple linear models, okay? So how are we going to do that? Well, you guys actually, you all have been doing it in the second homework assignment. And if you go through the second homework assignment and the answers carefully, you'll realize, hopefully, that if we look at our simple, I'm trying to get this thing to draw the way I want it to, our simple demand and supply diagram, what a lot of people do, and this is, by way of helping your learning, right? What a lot of people do when they first look at these diagrams is they focus on the price first. And really, efficiency has nothing to do with the price. Efficiency is really about the question of what's the right quantity. So again, I'm just gonna put price up here, and I'm gonna note that we measure everything on that axis in dollars. That's our units. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's talk to somebody, okay? How about Cameron? How are you doing, Cameron? You here? Cameron Reyes?
Yes.
How are you doing?
I'm okay.
You're okay. Not better than that, but you're okay. Okay, that's good. Well, so do you remember we said, and hopefully you agreed, we talked about the demand and the inverse demand, right? And that as a consumer, which all of us are, right? I mean, you go out and buy stuff all the time, I'm sure. Isn't that right, Cameron?
I'm sorry, what was that? I couldn't
So
hear.
you go out and buy stuff all the time. You're a consumer,
yes.
right? And do you remember we talked about demand and the inverse demand, like last time we got together?
Yes.
Right. So as a consumer, right, you pay attention to price because the price is a signal to you about whether or not you want to buy the thing, I imagine. I mean, that's the way most people operate.
That is correct.
Yes, you look at the price. You're like, is the price this or the price that? But as an economic analyst, the real question for us is, and in fact, I'm gonna do this right now. Now watch this, Cameron. You see this? I'm gonna take the price. I'm gonna push it over here to the side, because for us, it doesn't really matter that much. For us, the question is, there's some good out there. Do you want to pick a good, Cameron? Maybe something you like to buy.
An iPhone.
Okay, so this could be how, let's just be general, like the cell phone market, right? It could be cell phones. Okay, we could just call it cell phones, so we don't have to be iPhones.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll just say, okay, so this is the quantity of cell phones. But can you see that the question here is, what's the right quantity of cell phones to produce for society as a whole, right? I mean, you might imagine, let's do, because do you know how many people are in the United States?
No.
Okay, this is like quick fact. There are about 340 million people in the United States. You should just like store that in your brain. It'll be approximately true for the next decade. And after that, you might want to revise it upward a little bit. But 340 million, right? So we could put 100 million over there. And so, and let's put over here about 500 million cell phones. And I didn't even label the equilibrium, but you can see the equilibrium, right?
Yes.
Right. I'm just gonna put it there. And do you think everybody in the US has a cell phone? Ooh, interesting question. Right.
I think most people, but not everybody.
Babies don't. Right, like little babies. I mean, maybe when they're like 4 or 5, but like little babies don't have cell phones, right? That's part of the population. Do we agree? Do you know a little baby with a cell phone?
I don't think they have.
No, little babies don't have cell phones. And there are some people that, may be very elderly, or for some reason they don't want a cell phone, right? So the equilibrium over here, we know it can't be 340. Let's just say it's 300. Okay, for 300 million. How does that look? Right.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So the thing is, do we need 100 million cell phones? Do we need 300 million cell phones? Do we want to have 500 million cell phones? Do you see how that's like a societal level question? I mean, maybe it would be a little bit clearer if we talk about like what something that seems like it's essential. What about like coronavirus vaccines? How many of those do we need? Do we need one for every single person? What's something that you think, Cameron, that's like a critical thing to have in a society?
I can't think of one at the moment. I'm so sorry. I'm just going blank.
Okay. Well, okay. So we could talk about cell phones. We could talk about cookies. We could talk about hamburgers. But like most people, if they're talking about essential stuff, they'd mention stuff like coronavirus vaccines, or they might mention things like doctor services, right? I mean, that seems pretty important, right? That people have access to a doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that's important? I don't know. You know, different people, different priorities. So how about this? Give us one other example only of a product that you think is maybe, you know, like pretty important. Now, remember, you can talk about products or services, you know, like for services, it could be access to, you know, barber services or hairstylists, or my daughters go out and get their nails. And for a while, I don't know if this is still the trend or not, but I don't think it was kind of like at the beginning of the summer, suddenly my daughters all had super long eyelashes. Is that still the trend? I haven't asked them, but I've noticed that their super long eyelashes aren't super long anymore. Do you know, Cameron?
I'm not sure if that's still a trend or not.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, so but you know what I'm talking about, right? Like the eyelash extensions. I don't
Yeah.
know if you know or not, whatever. But yeah, so they like all did that, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But so you can't think of anything like that sounds like more important than like regular stuff.
Maybe cars or transportation services or
Yeah,
transportation.
transportation. Yeah, yeah, or maybe like you know how the Red Cross is always asking people to donate blood. Maybe like units of blood available, so if people get sick, they can have blood transfusions. I don't know. How about I'll open this up to anybody. Can anybody think of like something super important that you would want to make sure your population had access to as like somebody trying to plan for society more generally? Anybody have an idea? Help us make this like
The housing?
housing. That's a pretty good one. What do you think about that, Cameron?
I agree.
Yeah, so there you might, instead of cell phones, it could be houses, right? Like now I will let you know our numbers would be a little bit off. And do you know why our numbers would be off? If we have 340 million people, do we need 340 million houses?
No, not necessarily.
Why?
Some people share houses, some people.
Yeah, right. There's families, they live together. so in the United States, and so I'll switch this from cell phones just because maybe it's like a more fun example to think about, like the quantity matters. Okay, if I can get it to select the right part here. Let me, oh, there we go. Okay, I have to adjust this. Okay. I'm just gonna say homes, okay? And so the last data that I looked at said that out of 340 million people, there were about 160 million homes. Okay. So over here would be like, let's say 220 million, and we can still leave the 100. Okay. So, but you see how that's kind of, doesn't that seem like a more like kind of like pressing question. You know, as a society, if we have 160 million households, like families, we'd like them each to have a house to live in, right? That seems like an important question. The quantity matters. You see what I mean, Cameron?
Yes.
Yeah, because like if we don't have a home for each one of the families, then, you know, presumably some people are left homeless, and, you know, we could talk about whether that's good or bad, but the main point is that, that it's just kind of commonsensical that you would think that 160 million houses or homes, whether they're apartments or condos or whatever, like having people housed is important. And there it's the quantity that matters more than the price. Now, the big issue is, so, well, maybe not the big issue, but like one of the main points here is that rather than you as a consumer focusing on prices now, as an analyst, an economic analyst concerned with questions of resource distribution, you should begin to train yourself to look at the quantity. And the point is that you can imagine that once you're focused on quantity, this issue of inefficiency, and I also want to introduce like a new sort of way of thinking about things, but this is really common in economics, and see if this makes sense to you, Cameron. A synonym for inefficiency, hold on, if I can get my efficiency, is waste. You're wasting resources. Does that make sense to you? Inefficiency is equal to waste.
That makes sense.
Right. So, but you could see here, right, that over on this left side, right, if we have 100 million houses and we need 160 million, would we be wasting any houses over here? Do you want me to repeat the question? Does that make sense? Are you there, Cameron?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Exactly. Okay. If we have 160 million households and we only have 100 million houses, if we only produce 100 million, would we be wasting any houses? Are you with me, Cameron? Seems like you're dropping out. Are you having trouble with the internet connection? Or should you repeat the question again? Okay. Maybe I'll let somebody else chime in that maybe knows the answer. Okay. If we have 160 million households, but only 100 million houses, would any of the houses be wasted? Anybody?
No.
Yes.
Okay, so who said yes?
Me, Gilbert.
Gilbert. So explain that.
If you have 160 million customers and you have 100 million homes.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
160 million households, right? So like families, let's just say family, right? And you only have 100 million houses. Are any of the houses wasted?
Oh, I mean, it would depend on how big the households are.
Well,
but
let's just make it easy because we can be very complicated here very quickly.
yeah,
Let's just say every family consists of 3 people, mom, dad, and baby, right? And they all need a home, but you only have 100 million homes. Would any of those homes be wasted?
no,
No, right? I mean, like what you're saying, you need 160 million, and you only produce 100 in your society, right? Each one, you know, you're going to have more than enough families to occupy those homes, right? But what if you have 220 houses that you build, and you only need 160? Then would there be waste?
yeah,
Yeah, right. Because a lot of those homes are going to be empty half the time, right? Or maybe all the time. And maybe you know, some people have more than one home. Some people have a vacation home and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it makes sense. There would be some matchup between the number of households and the number of houses, right? If you didn't want to have any waste. And so that's actually, and I just drew the demand and supply diagram here, and I picked an equilibrium where the number of housing units or homes was about equal to the number of households. But that's exactly what our standard market does, is it picks an output level, right? So the real question here is for society to pick an output level. Homes are expensive to build. They take a lot of time to build, and they take a lot of resources to build. You wouldn't want to be building tons and tons of houses that were never going to be occupied, right? Does anybody disagree with me or
I
want to
just wanted
talk
to
about?
actually agree with you. So that was actually like the 2008 recession when they actually made too many homes and it caused like too many companies to go under. Is it like that? Like they overbuilt?
Well, yeah, I mean, you would call that malinvestment, and you're right. There were all of these developments that were abandoned out in San Bernardino, and
Yeah.
they were being broken into, and there's like crazy stuff. It was a waste, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you would hope that the market would pick an equilibrium quantity. Remember, the equilibrium quantity is the quantity that is actually produced and consumed in the market. You would hope that the market would pick a quantity that wasn't way too low or way too high for the needs of your society. And so when we draw our market equilibrium diagram, that's what you all should see, is that over here we have total surplus, and it's positive, and it's contributing, remember, to efficiency, because it's, you know, there's no waste over here, right? Up until we get to the market equilibrium quantity. And then if you go on the other side of the equilibrium, this ends up being negative total surplus, and there are efficiency losses. Okay. So one of the ways that you can see the first fundamental welfare theorem in our diagram is, remember, the first fundamental welfare theorem tells us, right, that competitive markets are efficient. Okay. And we use a particular measure, okay, of efficiency. So economists use total surplus to measure efficiency. Okay. So what you'll be able to see by the end of the first homework assignment, if you're paying attention, is that by picking the equilibrium quantity as a quantity to produce, that this is another way of saying the first fundamental welfare theorem. So I'll say first fundamental welfare theorem, second definition, another way of saying the same thing, right? The competitive market maximizes total surplus. That's our claim. So hopefully, and so Gilbert, I'll talk to you for just another minute because you seem like you were picking up on this, and hopefully it'll make sense to everybody else too. And if you guys have questions about this, then let me know. So you there, Gilbert? Gilbert. No, Gilbert. Okay. Let's see. Did Gilbert go away? What about you?
Sorry, what'd you?
Okay. Well, okay.
Sorry.
I was explaining my second definition for the first fundamental welfare theorem. Is the first fundamental welfare theorem also tells us equivalently, right? Competitive markets are efficient. Well, we use total surplus to measure efficiency. Okay, that's just something I'm telling you. So another way of saying that competitive markets are efficient is to say that competitive markets maximize total surplus. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, now look, right? So what you should have learned from the homework, or one of the things you should have learned from the homework, and I'll try to get a different color here, is that you see over here on the left side of the diagram, before we get to the equilibrium quantity, that all of these units have a positive amount of total surplus associated with them, okay? And so if you want to maximize total surplus, then you ought to produce all of the units up until the equilibrium quantity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. So one way,
the dead loss.
Well, yeah. So once you get past this would be negative total surplus. So all of these
inefficiency
units, over here are actually the cost of production is higher than the value to the consumers. So, this would be like if we all already had, 4 vacation homes and a house to live in, right? Then, the houses would just be standing empty and nobody would ever be using them, right? So we wouldn't want to pay very much for another house. Our willingness to pay, and hopefully you're okay with this, Gilbert. But remember, the height of the demand curve, which I'm pointing to here, that measures the willingness to pay of the consumer that buys the unit, right? So here you can see the willingness to pay on the right side is less than the cost, which is measured by the height of the supply curve. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Another way that we could be inefficient, right, is we could produce way too little. And if we did produce, let's say, only 100 million houses, then we could be throwing this positive area away, right? So if we didn't make something that was needed, we would be giving up potential positive contributions to total surplus. So the main point that I'm trying to make, and hopefully everybody gets this, because this is a main point for the whole class and for economics generally, is that we can, in fact, demonstrate that the market equilibrium quantity maximizes total surplus, and we can just do it by computing the total surplus for different levels of output and finding out that here at the equilibrium quantity, that the level of total surplus is indeed the biggest that it could possibly be in the whole market. And if you go through the homework assignment, you get to the place in the homework assignment where it says, you know, calculate total surplus for 2 more units than the equilibrium quantity and 2 less units than the equilibrium quantity. And what you should see, okay, are you still with me, Gilbert? I wanna
Yes, I
see
am.
if I can do this. Okay, so let's, here we're gonna draw a different type of diagram. Okay, below it, I'm going to draw the standard market equilibrium diagram. And okay, there's our demand, and here's our supply. And I'm going to put Q star, the equilibrium quantity, on the diagram where it should be. And then I'm going to begin measuring total surplus. And so we said that total surplus, and I suppose I'll color it in as being pink here. So as you all have done in the homework, we can measure total surplus. Here is the distance between the demand and supply diagram. And so we took like the area of this trapezoid at one quantity. Let's call it, we'll say this is Q1. Then I can calculate the area of that trapezoid. And up here on this diagram, get my axes going. I don't want that to be red. So, okay, that'll be my axis. Yeah. Here, I'm measuring price on the vertical axis. Here, I'm going to measure total surplus. And so at Q1, on this horizontal axis up here, at the corresponding Q1, I'm going to plot the value of the area associated with the level of total surplus below. So here at Q1, see if this makes sense, Gilbert. I'm going to take that area and I'm going to plot it as a value. Let's say we calculated that area and it had a value of 1600. Do you remember the units for total surplus? It's 1600 what, Gilbert?
1600.
It's the units are dollars. It's price times quantity here. So if I took the value of this area, I would get 1600 and the units would be dollars. So I would say there's $1,600 worth of total surplus. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And so to kind of illustrate, I'm going to make this a dot here. Okay. So does that dot make sense to you, Gilbert?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So
That's the area, correct?
yeah, I mean, that's the, like, you guys have been calculating these areas in the
Yeah,
homework.
you plot the area on a point.
Yeah, I plot the area on a point here on a different axis. And now at Q star, what I'm telling you is, and it's kind of, you know, a pretty simple idea, but right, if we went all the way to Q star, then it wouldn't just be the area of that red trapezoid. We'd be adding to it all of this area, right, that makes up this big triangle here to the left of Q star, right? So at Q star, if we plotted total surplus, now I'm going to make it pink, it'd be some bigger number. I'm just going to say it's going to be something like $3,000 worth of total surplus. Okay. Does that make sense, Gilbert?
It does, yeah.
And now if we pick some arbitrary point, now again, in your homework, you were picking 2 units less and 2 units more, right? But the argument would work the same way, because either, Gilbert, you would be cutting off part of this area, right?
Yeah,
Or if you
adding.
go over here, right? This is interpreted as negative total surplus. So if, for example, let's say I go over here and I calculate total surplus at Q2, let's see, just gonna let me Q2 there, and I'll put Q2 up here also, Q2, and move these things around a little bit. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, I'll move that a little bit that way. Bring this out just a little bit so you can see it's still the same axis. Okay. There. Okay, Gilbert. So if I begin adding contributions of total surplus over here, right? You see the orange area, right? This is actually and I'll put it in orange, negative TS, or negative contributions to total surplus. So now at Q2, right, I would be making, okay. Are you with me, Gilbert?
Yes, I am. I'm still here.
So I'd be making all of this, right? I would get to $3,000 worth of total surplus. And now I would be subtracting off this area, which let's say it's like, $1,200 negative dollars of total surplus, right? So then it'd be 3,000 over here minus 1,200 over here. And if I was going to plot that, then it would be below,
3,000.
right? It'd be over here, like at 3,000 minus 1,200 would be $1,800 worth of total surplus. And then, so I guess kind of, and so you can do that for any, and hopefully, again, the second homework exercise was supposed to walk you through actually doing this. And so hopefully it made sense to everybody. But what's really going on is that if you plot all of those values, what you're going to see is that, and you could do this for each and every level of output, you're going to see that total surplus hits a peak, okay, at Q star. So can you see my this is if I had plotted every level of total surplus for every possible quantity.
And the pink would be
Can you see it?
the center of production, so it'd be like the most efficient production.
Yeah, so this is just showing you that the peak of total surplus happens at Q star. And that's the way, that's exactly what we just said, is that the market picks this point of output where demand and supply cross. That's how we identify market equilibrium. But you might not have known this, but if you take Q star and find the total surplus associated with Q star, the market equilibrium quantity, that also happens to be not just where demand and supply cross, but it also happens to be where total surplus is at a maximum, okay? And since total surplus is how we measure efficiency in economics, we have thus just demonstrated that the first fundamental welfare theorem is true. Namely, we've demonstrated that the competitive market, by picking Q star, right, by picking the equilibrium quantity, also is maximizing total surplus. Does that make sense, Gilbert? It's kind of a three-step argument, right? So the first fundamental welfare theorem tells us simply competitive markets are efficient, right? But as somebody that is a critical thinker, right? You're supposed to be asking reasonable questions and not just, oh, competitive markets are efficient because Dr. Hunter told me they were, right? You should ask the question like, how do we know? Right? I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, efficiency is really important and that the market is efficient and that's one reason for preferring it over other means of production and distribution. I'll tell you something. It's pretty interesting. Okay. So I don't know. Is there anybody else besides Gilbert that wants to chat for just a minute? Anybody? Nobody.
We're here.
Okay. Who wants to chat? Is it? I heard somebody say hi. Who was it?
Oh no, I was just saying we were here.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Andrew, you want to chat for just a minute? Okay. You're like, no, I don't want to chat. I just was saying I'm here. Okay. Nobody wants to chat. Okay. Well, if you guys don't want to, who is it? It's still Gilbert. Okay, Gilbert. So check this out, right? There is a article in the Wall Street Journal today. And you know what the article is about? The article is about China. And we know that the Chinese economic system doesn't rely on markets as heavily as the US system, right? Right. Now, there are a lot of markets in China, but there's also a lot more government control of resources, a lot more centralized planning. And so the article in the Wall Street Journal is about how the Chinese government, by directing resources, has become a world leader in certain technology areas. And the one that they pointed out was AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning technology. So that kind of, you know, do you see how it kind of like casts doubt on the importance of the first fundamental welfare theorem?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you want to draw that out for me a little bit? Like, what do you think about that? I mean,
are you basically saying that for China's market, if you're looking at just their market, their markets aren't competitive and they're more of dominant markets than anything. So they don't really have competitive markets. So it doesn't really allow for complete efficiency. That's why their individual economy is so fragile, like their GDP, rather than like their actual whole economy as a whole.
Yeah, well, actually, kind of what the Wall Street Journal is pointing out is that, you know, subtly, like maybe it's better, right, to have the government direct resources in certain contexts and to take them outside of the market, if you want to, you know, I'm doing air quotes here, but to use your word, if you want to dominate in a certain industry, right? You know, that your markets are competitive doesn't guarantee, right, that you're going to dominate in certain technologies or anything like that.
That's correct.
All
like
it
Canada,
says,
pretty much like us, but they don't dominate the markets like us.
Yeah, all it says is that what you do produce through the market is going to be efficient, right? And then the other question that we asked earlier, and which you all should ask, because there's not much outside of this class that you're going to encounter when you're studying economics that's going to discuss something other than market efficiency. So you should ask yourself the question, well, you know, am I convinced that market efficiency is the most important goal, right? And I don't know how you'll answer that question, but it's something worth thinking about if, you know, you're training to become an economist, because you're going to be trained to pay attention to when markets are inefficient, and when those markets, well, not when markets are inefficient, when markets are inefficient, it's normally due to some government control, but when there's a resource issue and the outcome is inefficient, you're going to be trained to pay attention to that. And normally what economists suggest is to get rid of any government intervention, get rid of any of the constraints, and let the market function as if it was a, you know, a free and competitive market, and that's the way to restore efficiency. So the solution to inefficiency is competition. And so what we've been talking about and what you should be thinking about is, you know, inefficiency means waste, right? And hopefully after we, talked about the housing issue, you can kind of connect up the idea that, yeah, obviously, for society, it would be a bad outcome to produce a lot of houses that were never going to be occupied. That's one way of getting waste, right? It's also wasteful to have lots of people that are willing to pay a lot of money for a house, but for some reason they can't get one, even though what they're willing to pay is much higher than the cost, which would be this orange area. So there are two ways to get inefficiency. So two ways for resources to be wasted in an economy. Well, if competition doesn't waste resources, that then seems like a good thing. But if competition also means that sometimes in certain technology areas, other things like that, we fall behind other countries, in some sense, would it be worth it to, like, for example, and I'll just, put this as a question for you all to think about it. If you think about, instead of this being homes, think of it as, I don't know if you guys know about like units of processing capacity or whatever, but like 100, teraflops of AI machine learning capacity versus 220, teraflops of machine learning capacity. If the market would only provide us with 160 teraflops, would it be better for the government to mandate that we have 220 teraflops of capacity? Or if you're talking about something like, Wi-Fi broadband access, if the market only produces this amount, is there any reason why you'd want to say, well, I know it's wasteful, but we should still have it because there's something missing from our definition of, or our measure of efficiency, which is total surplus? And if you can answer that question, then you might be able to come up with a good argument for why we shouldn't rely on competitive markets in certain circumstances. But right now, and at the beginning of this class, I haven't introduced to you any of the possible reasons why we might want to deviate from relying on the competitive market. So, but that's going to be coming up in a little bit. But right now, this is what you all have been learning and what you've learned to demonstrate. So competitive markets maximize total surplus, and that's the main story in most of economic theory. So I'll ask you really quickly, do you all have any questions for me? I'm gonna